Hello, Central Florida, and welcome to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber and Supply. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and you're listening to my 790 AM WLBE in beautiful Leesburg, Florida. I'd also like to welcome our viewers who are watching us today on Lake Sumter Television. That's LSTV, courtesy of Red Apples Media, on Bright House 498, Comcast 13, and Florida Cable number 4. Romac Lumber's been a leading provider of building materials in Lake County since 1945, and Romac Lumber is the primary source of information for builders and homeowners. With locations in Leesburg, Mount Dora, the Villages, and Ocala, Romac Lumber has the area covered. Now, there is no better place to live than right here in Lake and Sumter County, but in early August, Floridians have learned to keep one eye at the tropics, as this is the time of when hurricane season really gets serious. Hurricane season began on June 1st and will last until November 30th, and waiting to prepare for a disaster for you and your family when a hurricane warning is posted, well, that's just too late. Today we're very pleased to have as our special guest Mr. Tom Carpenter, who is the Emergency Management Division Manager for Lake County, and we're going to discuss hurricane preparedness plus disaster preparedness. Tommy has extensive knowledge and information on how to prepare for hurricanes and other disasters, and today we think this is going to be a good time to discuss your emergency preparedness. For my part, as a young adult, I spent many years riding out hurricanes on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and I've seen enough to know I've seen too much. Well, we should have a very engaging conversation, and I hope you enjoy it, so please stay tuned. So with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Tommy Carpenter, the Emergency Management Division Director for Lake County. Tommy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invitation.
We are glad to have you back. This is a yearly event, and each year the dynamics change, things change, and there's different topics this year. But very first, let's take a few minutes and talk about the Lake County Emergency Management Department and what services you guys are providing.
We are part of the Public Safety Department in Lake County. All 67 counties in the state of Florida have an emergency management office. Our primary goal is to work with our most vulnerable community, those that are registered in our special needs program, to communicate with them, take care of them, and help them if we ever have to open shelters. We also are responsible for the county's comprehensive emergency management plan, the county's overall disaster plan, the local mitigation strategy, which I think you and I talked about earlier about the flooding and things of how we can help mitigate those processes. And one thing that we've really worked with over the last several years are special events, the large events that we have coming to Lake County, Leesburg Bike Fest, the festivals that they have in Mount Dora, Claremont, and Eustis in our cities. So we're pretty involved in a lot of that goes on in the county in terms of planning and preparedness.
Well, you know, Tommy, I guess it goes without saying, as the county grows bigger, the threats inherently become larger, but it seems like as of late, there's threats and dangers on every corner, isn't it? And it's your job to be prepared for them all, isn't it?
It is. Often we hear folks, when they hear emergency management, they think hurricanes, and fortunately we haven't had a hurricane here in a long time, but really we are in an all-hazard preparedness. So we encourage folks to not only think about weather, but to think in all aspects of their lives. If they had to get up in the middle of the night, there was an explosion of a propane plant, which we had a couple years ago, or if a 100-foot sinkhole developed, which happened 2 years ago, and they had to get up in the middle of the night and leave to think about those things.
Take a few minutes and talk about your emergency management center. It's a fairly brand new building. It's a couple of years old, state of the art. Tell our listeners where it's located and what the services are provided in that building.
Okay. It's a 2-story building, 28,000 square feet. The Board of County Commissioners approved it in 2009, I believe. But the funding covered the structure itself and the integral parts of the building. The first floor is a 911 center. And in that 911 center is the Sheriff's Office and Lake EMS. So the ambulance service not only dispatches for ambulances, but for all of the fire departments in Lake County. And the Sheriff's Office dispatches for the sheriff's staff and for all of the law enforcement agencies with the exception of 4 cities. In terms of the upstairs, which is the Emergency Operations Center, is where we conduct annual trainings and meetings in terms of our community partners, all of our cities, non-governmental agencies, folks that we bring together to prepare for hurricane season and the vast amount of different hazards that we have in the county. One of the things I like to remind folks is we've had the effects of an earthquake back in 2006 in February and September out in the Gulf. Anybody that lives in the north end of the county, they know when the Navy bombs. Well, in the south end of the county, those folks were calling 911 wanting to know what was going on, and it was the aftershocks of an earthquake. So we have a vast array of different things that do affect us here.
Well, we're currently in August, and we've had a very rainy summer. In fact, there's significant flood, and we're going to talk about that later. But once again, it seems like there's different hazards everywhere. If someone has a question about emergency preparedness, how can they contact you in your office, and what are the resources available online, Tommy?
We can, if they want to call our office, we're at 352-343-9420. They're welcome to call us. Staff will be more than happy to talk to them. If it's something that's not in our particular discipline, then we will be happy to connect them with the appropriate folks. We have online brochures, so anybody that goes to the county's website at www.lakecountyfl.gov, in the keyword, just put emergency, and then they come up on our site. We have brochures that cover preparedness, pets, sheltering, special needs, the various weather hazards, thunderstorms, lightning, heat. We've got all that information available. So we have and now on social media, I believe our Facebook is Lake County FL Emergency Management, and we have a Twitter handle at Lake Emergency.
Good.
So we have multiple ways of trying to communicate with folks.
And you want people to contact you.
Absolutely, we want them to contact us.
Because if they're unsure right now as what to do, for example, if you're listening or watching us today and you're unsure what you will do during an emergency, and you go to the website and you're still not sure, you should call now, because when the emergency happens, it's too late, isn't it?
It is. And I will tell you, we do a lot of talks about hurricane preparedness, and Lake County hasn't really truly had a hurricane since 1960. We were talking about this earlier. We had wind and rain in 2004, but I will always refer back to all hazards preparedness and to those folks near Blue Rhino on July 29th, 2013, and those folks at Summer Bay Resort where the sinkhole occurred on August 11th, 2013. It was the middle of the night, and they had to get up and leave. So if you want to talk about ultimate preparedness, something happens in the middle of the night, it wakes you up, and in 5 minutes you got to be gone.
You have something that you advertise on the website called the Alert Lake System. Can you tell our viewers and listeners about that?
It is. It's the county's emergency notification system, and what it is, we use the 911 data for folks who have phones, so we can send a message to them if we need to, and then we have it connected to the National Weather Service. So if we have a tornado warning that's issued, then all those folks that are registered in whatever area that the tornado warning is issued for will get a message warning them. And it's just another tool in our communications toolbox in terms of how we can communicate with the public. I strongly advocate folks who have their favorite news media, stick with them. And all the news channels do a phenomenal job in terms of weather and providing updates. And so this just gives us another tool in which we can communicate with the public.
Well, what about this, Tommy? A lot of folks have these now. They don't have hardwired phones. They live on their cell phone. Can that cell phone be hooked up on the alert system?
It sure can. With folks can get on there, they can register, and they register their number, so we can send them not only a voice message but email, and they can get both of those on their cell phone.
Okay. If you had a major disaster today, what happens at the emergency center?
We monitor 24/7. We're always watching what's going on, and then we actually would do a couple things simultaneously. We'd not only start communicating with our stakeholders, but then with the public. And we get with the county's communications department and start getting those messages out of what we need folks to do and the information they need to have or where they need to go to get it. So then via press release, if it's significant enough where we can get the Orlando media market up here to listen, our social media, we're sending all this information out to folks. And on the same time, then we're working with internal stakeholders to start the preparedness part of what we need to do and get ready for.
So you have a Facebook page?
Yes, sir, we do.
Now, how's your Facebook page listed, Tommy?
It is listed. Let me make sure I get this correct. It's at Lake County FL Emergency Management.
So go to Facebook, like that, and that way you can stay up to date on all the emergency information.
Absolutely. County's PIO, Alicia Papakota, does a tremendous job of keeping us updated, especially with the weather.
Good.
You mentioned that earlier. June 1st started. It was like a light switch. All the severe thunderstorm warnings, power out, trees down. It's been a rainy summer.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and we have a special guest, Tommy Carpenter. He's the division manager for Lake County Emergency Services. And do you have hurricane impact windows at your house? More and more people are using impact-resistant hurricane windows for their homes right here in Lake County for maximum protection against storms and break-ins. Yes, break-ins. Impact windows are great to prevent people from breaking in your house. A window made with impact design glass will take a beating of a hurricane without breaking through. Call Romac Lumber in Leesburg at 352-787-4545. That's 352-787-4545. And ask about the full line of hurricane impact windows from such manufacturers as PGT, Custom Window Systems, YKK, and Kobe Window and Doors. Hurricane season begins in May. What emergency preparations should homeowners take before the first threat? For example, right now, if a hurricane's not threatening, what should have already been in place?
I think what I've already seen this year, more so than I've seen in past years, are trees. I've seen a lot of folks beginning to get trees away from their homes. Older trees where the branches can fall. It's just a natural Mother Nature's process of cleaning them up when the winds and rain come. But I get the trees away from the home. Any repairs to the home, if you have any roof, just minor repairs that can be done. And then the plan for the house. If you have a lot of folks with pools, if you have a pool, a lot of folks can take their furniture out there at the patio and they actually can put it in the pool and know that they can do that if a hurricane were to come along, to keep that debris from flying around and to affect the home. So just be mindful of the outside of the home, any home repairs, and getting those things tidied up and fixed up.
And one thing very important about trees, with all the rain we've had this summer, it's not going to take much to blow over trees, and a lot of these hollow water oaks are full of water, and they're just wanting to split now, aren't they?
They are. And we've seen that in the last couple of weeks. Just these, folks refer to them as Florida afternoon thunderstorms, but they're powerful. They're coming in with 50, 60 mile an hour gusts, and they're knocking them right over. And fortunately, we haven't had very many homes impacted, but they are knocking them down, and it doesn't take much.
Let's talk about the emergency preparedness kit. Since 9/11, and let's be honest with you, when 9/11 happened, a lot of things changed as far as people saying, you better be prepared for emergencies. Every home should have an emergency preparedness kit. What should be in that kit, Tommy?
It should. Every home should have at least a NOAA weather radio ready to go. Those are the best thing at night to get folks up and wake them up. They should have, in terms of food and water, they should have 3 to 5 days. I think if you go to FEMA site, they'll say 3 days. Past experiences with Florida in particular during Hurricane Wilma, there were parts of South Florida that went for weeks. I'll say 5 because I think it's a good round number. Food and water, supplies for pets. If you have children, have their particular supplies. Senior citizens, whatever supplies they need. Medications, if you take prescription medications, then there's actually a House bill, there's Florida statute that'll help you get your medications before a hurricane and give you a several-week supply. So it's making sure that have everything that you need in there. LED flashlights are phenomenal. Batteries last forever. They're battery-powered AM, FM radios to keep up and get the information when the power's out. Those are some of the things, and folks may find non-perishable foods, a manual can opener, big item to have.
Big item. Well, everything you've mentioned, I actually have used many times before in the hurricane. I guess the way I describe it, imagine you being without power or any way to go somewhere for 3 to 5 days. Could you survive? And think about all the things you need, from medicines to everything, personal needs. That is really what has to be in that kit, isn't it?
Absolutely. And a lot of folks live in cities where they have municipal water or a water system where they can turn their water on and it runs just fine. But a lot of folks live in the country and they have a well and they don't have power, they don't have water. So that's something really important to think about. And I think a lot of us take for granted when we don't have water or how much we use it. So it's the little things like that, and it's actually kind of a fun exercise for a family to undergo. Okay, we have no power for 3 to 5 days, so what is it that we need, or what are the things we need to have?
And Tommy, I think about this also. During the hurricanes, the most popular thing after the storm was a grill, because you had no power and your food and your freezer was going bad. And folks who had grills, in fact, I remember we used to have a little neighborhood block thing after one party. Everybody took their meat over to this guy's house and they cooked it up and they ate off the food that was in the freezer. And if you didn't do that, it was going to go bad. So extra bottle of propane, extra charcoal, those things are very important. Plus extra fuel if you can safely store it. A lot of people forget fuel for the generators and the chainsaws. So it's, once again, just imagine, and let's take it beyond a hurricane. We hear today, this is another emergency threat that you could face tomorrow. We hear today about hacking that happens all the time. And there are people who believe that a foreign government could hack in and shut down our power grid. Say that happened. Don't know if it happened. Maybe that's far-fetched. But shut down our power grid for a week. And you couldn't get fuel for your car and you couldn't get things. Would you be able to survive on your own for 3 to 5 days? And that's what you're really talking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. It goes back to really the term I'll use is all hazards preparedness. It doesn't matter what happens. It's actually fun. There are some counties in the state of Florida that actually do zombie exercises once a year. And as silly as it sounds, it just gets people thinking. Think about the worst case scenario, nothing in particular, and think about how you would survive for 3 to 5 days on your own. And could you do it?
So everyone listening, you should get your preparedness kit, and especially if you live in Florida during this time of year when we could have a hurricane. You never know if Hurricane Andrew is going to be born in the next week or so and come ashore, do you?
You sure don't. And, it could happen in the Gulf in 2 days and strike us. And it could be just a massive tropical storm. It could be a Category 1, something that typically folks think is less powerful, but it could come in and just do tremendous damage. It could come in and destroy our electrical system the way it is, where we have to have folks come in and repair it and put it back together. That can take a week.
Absolutely. Thinking about hurricanes, what's your biggest concern, Tommy?
I think is that we haven't had that type of weather system in a long time. 2004, we had 4 hurricanes that affected Florida relatively soon, but in Lake County, we did not have a hurricane. We had lots of wind and rain. There's no empirical data that we've found through the National Weather Service where we had sustained winds of 74 miles an hour for a hurricane. And I know it gusted strong in some places and it did a lot of damage, but Lake County's last hurricane was 1960 with Hurricane Donna. So I think a lot of folks really don't understand what a hurricane is and what the potential damage it could do. And that I think concerns me more than anything, is just folks really don't understand what one can do.
And I think people get lulled to sleep. A lot of people think, well, the forecasters are saying this is going to be a slow hurricane year. I think the year that Hurricane Andrew hit, there was only one hurricane that year.
It was a El Nino year. There were 7 storms, and Andrew was the first one, but it only took one.
Yeah,
and it was a big one.
It was a massive one. And you mentioned Hurricane Donna came through here in 60, but it also went up through to the Mississippi River and through Louisiana and my section of the country, and it wreaked havoc over there. So it's amazing how these hurricanes can really go. Hurricane Sandy, in October 2012, opened a lot of eyes because it basically showed that a hurricane can hit anywhere in the United States, from Brownsville, Texas, all the way up to Maine. And it also opened a lot of eyes where people need to look at their homeowners insurance and their own insurances and the preparedness, didn't it?
It sure did. We talked about earlier about insurance and preparedness or what you should have done around the house. And I think everyone annually should check their insurance. If they're homeowners, right now I'm between homes, I'm renting, but I have renter's insurance. And that's something I do annually, is talk to my agent and figure out where I am, because you just never know. And fortunately, it seems like home values are ticking back up in Lake County. So that should be even more for folks to every year, go check with the insurance agent, figure out what it is. Are we in the right place? Are we doing what we need to do?
Well, the most devastating thing about Hurricane Sandy and really Hurricane Katrina was the flooding. Mm-hmm. And want to talk about flooding just a little bit because that's in your purview. We've had a lot of flooding rains in August. July was wet. We're having flooding rains starting August. There's massive flooding going on in Tampa. They've had issues. You do not have to live by a river or a lake or ocean to be flooded and need flood insurance. According to what I've been told by other insurance people, if you're on a street and you have a 13-inch rain and street water backs into 2 or 3 houses, that goes to flood insurance, and you should have flood insurance. And a lot of people are just not prepared, are they, Tommy?
They're not. And I think that, or they're just they may not understand. They think they have homeowners insurance, and my homeowners insurance, I have a hurricane deductible, and I'm covered, but they're not when it comes to water. Even rain that comes in sideways that strongly, that comes through a door or somewhere into the house, can often be insurance companies will look at it as a flooding issue that's not covered by homeowners insurance. They need to have flooding insurance. So again, this is where folks really need to follow up with their insurance agents and get that information and clearly delineate what's flooding and what's not.
Especially in light of having such a wet July and now starting in August and this time of year, isn't flooding probably our biggest danger if we have a hurricane hit Lake County?
It could be, depending if it's a fast-moving storm that comes through where the wind may do more damage, or if it's one that's traveling a couple miles an hour and just dumps 15 to 20 inches of rain. That could really, really hurt us. Right now, we've had a lot of rain this summer, so I know our lakes are filling up. The ground capacity is starting to saturate itself a little bit, so it really could. 15 inches of rain, 20 inches of rain could come in and really be devastating to parts of Lake County.
I want to talk a little bit about shelters,
Okay.
and shelters are a big deal. And y'all recently made a bold move in regards to shelters and pets. Talk a minute about your shelters, where they're located, how many shelters you have in Lake County, and what's sort of the policy on shelters?
We have 9 shelters. Lake County's shelters are all elementary schools, and I'll list them off. Astatula Elementary, Leesburg Elementary School, Lost Lake in Claremont, Mascot Charter Elementary, Round Lake Charter Elementary outside of Mount Dora, Spring Creek in the Paisley area, Treadway in Leesburg, Umatilla Elementary School, and the Villages Elementary School. And of the 9 shelters in past years, 4 of the 9 have been pet friendly. So if you had a pet that you needed to shelter, you could go to 4 of those shelters. This past year, the Sheriff's Office took over management of animal services in Lake County, and we've worked with them to have the staff at all 9 shelters. And that's been an important fact for a lot of folks. If they have to shelter, they're not going to leave their pets at home. They need to be able to bring them with them. So they can come to any of our shelters as long as the pets are crated. They've got their vaccination information, food and water for them, where they can go feed them and spend time with them when it's safe to do so. But they're taken to an out area that's safe, and animal services folks, technicians will stay with them and make sure they're okay until the weather passes.
Now, first off, these schools that you're going to, they're not just typical schools. These schools have been built and remodeled to meet Florida's strict hurricane codes.
They have. They meet American Red Cross's 4496 standards, and then they've got the areas that the public will be in are called enhanced hurricane protection areas.
The other thing about the pets, very important, that you cannot keep your pets with you. A lot of people, they don't want to, leave the dog with him, but you cannot because of the health and safety of others.
Correct. You can't. A lot of folks have allergies, and we've really heard a lot of this lately after there's been a popular question after all of our shelters have gone to be pet friendly, so that's why they're kept in another safe area. But it's also important for folks to understand too that service animals that go to shelters with their owners can remain with the owners, and it's not something we see often, but it's important for folks to know that if someone has a service animal, then that service animal can remain with the owner.
But when you bring your animal to the shelter, it has to be vaccinated.
That is correct.
If you do not have papers for the animal, what will happen then?
Then that's one of those things that we try to educate those folks ahead of time. But if not, then shelter staff's going to do the best they can to work with those folks, depending on how bad it really is outside.
Okay. We're having a great conversation with Tommy Carpenter. He's the Division Manager for Lake Emergency Management. And we've been talking about your emergency preparedness and hurricane preparedness. And when we return, we're going to talk a lot more about shelters because that's a big deal here in Lake County. Stay tuned, please. Welcome back to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. I'm your host, Don Magruder, and you're listening to my 790 AM WLBE in beautiful Leesburg, Florida. And I also like to welcome our viewers who are watching us today on Lake Sumter Television. That's LSTV, courtesy of Red Apples Media, on Bright House 498, Comcast 13, and cable number 4, Florida cable number 4. Our special guest today is Tommy Carpenter. He's the Division Manager for Emergency Management right here in Lake County. Right before the break, we were talking about the shelters, and this is such an important issue, Tommy. Let's go over the list of shelters again, and I want to touch a few more points, then we'll go to something else. But would you run down that list of shelters so everyone knows? Because during an emergency situation, whether it's hurricane or something else, people need to know where to go.
Sure. We have 9 shelters in Lake County that are considered primary risk shelters. They're all in elementary schools. So we'll start with Astatula Elementary, Leesburg Elementary, Lost Lake in the Claremont area elementary school, Mascot Charter, Round Lake Charter Elementary outside of Mount Dora, Spring Creek Charter Elementary in the Paisley area, Treadway Elementary in Leesburg, Umatilla Elementary School, and the Villages Elementary School.
And we were talking before the break about all of them are now pet friendly. You mentioned to me after you made the announcement that they were pet friendly. A lot of people called concerned because they had pet allergies. And you explained to them that
the pets are secured in an area away from the dormitory population. So where folks go to stay to ride out the weather is a different area than where they keep pets.
And to bring your pet to a shelter, you have to do what?
The pets need to be crated. They need to have their vaccination records brought with them, up to date. The owner needs to bring food and water and any essentials for the pet, because the owner can spend time with the pet when it's safe to do so. And then when the weather comes and it's time to hunker down, so to speak, then the pets will be kept in a separate area than the general population will be.
The most important thing to remember then, if you have to evacuate to a shelter quickly, have your pet records available.
Have them all ready to go, and that should really be included in all of the information that residents should have ready to go if they have to run out the door.
And the reason why you have to bring your vaccination records is because a pet that's not vaccinated could infect other pets or be a danger to the humans, correct?
Absolutely, and I think that we would see that during blue skies anytime. That it's the veterinary, the vets and folks in public safety would always advocate that pets be vaccinated to prevent those animal-type diseases.
Now, we forgot to talk about one thing. We talked about getting the pets in the shelter. We forgot to talk about putting the humans in the shelter.
That's right.
Because there's a lot of people who errantly, and I'm going to say errantly, believe when they go to a shelter, there's going to be a cot, a bed, food, water, drink. There's going to be just rolled out almost like a Motel 6. And Tommy, you say what?
When we talk to folks, and we talk to a lot of folks over the course of the year, our message to them is that if you are in an unsafe structure of any type and don't feel safe in where you live, if a hurricane were to come, then reach out to friends, family, loved ones, communicate with them, find a good site-built home to go to ride it out, because you're going to be far more comfortable there than a shelter. But if you need a county shelter, they're safe. However, they don't provide the accommodations to make you comfortable. And so I brought a list of items of things to remind folks, if you do have to go to a shelter and it's the last place that you really have that's safe, you should be prepared to bring your own blankets, pillows, sleeping bags, your prescribed medications if you take them, toiletries, extra clothing, battery-operated radio and flashlight, personal items including books and toys, infant necessities, senior supplies if they're appropriate for your stay, and important papers such as a valid identification. Because a lot of these shelters don't have backup generator power, so you could be there in the dark with lots of other folks in the same situation you are, and The shelter, as a county, we can't provide that stuff to you. You have to bring it, but space is limited.
So you essentially bringing everything you need, from food to water to clothing to bedding to that shelter to sustain you during the emergency.
Absolutely. And when we plan for shelter space, we use American Red Cross standards. It's nothing we've made up. It's a national standard, 20 square feet per person. And that's not a lot of space.
That's 4 foot by 5 foot.
That is correct.
4 foot by 5 foot.
If you're a taller person, you can make it however you want to make it.
That's 3 foot by 6.5 foot.
It's not much space.
Now, that's sort of bad for me because I might be 3 foot by 6.5 foot. So,
but folks need to remember that, and that's why we really preach that message. If you have friends and family, it's time to talk with them, and if you have family feuds, this is the time to make up, because you really truly are going to be much more comfortable with them.
But do not stay in an unsafe structure, because during a hurricane or a big event, you can't come get them, can you?
Absolutely not. When part of our planning process, when tropical storm force winds start, sustained winds of 39 miles an hour or stronger, then everything shuts down. Buses aren't on the road. Fire trucks, ambulances, anything that can be tipped over by wind do not respond. So for those folks that need that shelter, they're safe. Absolutely, they're safe. Not only structurally, but our law enforcement community is there also. But it just is not going to be the most comfortable. So it's time to plan now to ensure that you have the things you need to make it as comfortable as you can.
And one other thing we need to talk about, you cannot bring weapons in shelters, can you?
You cannot. There's recent legislation that passed that would allow folks to carry weapons during an evacuation, but not into a shelter. But we are working with our law enforcement community to make provisions that if someone is evacuating and it's one of those hectic moments where they're trying to remember 100 things at once, where when they come into the shelter and they have weapons and they can't secure them, there's a plan that we're going to have in play to make sure that we can.
Okay.
It's not something we advocate. It's not something we want, but we know that we need to plan for it. So we've reached out to the law enforcement community to figure that out.
Can you discuss the type of evacuations you're going to put in place in an emergency here in Lake County?
In terms of an evacuation, in my experience, excuse me, we'll issue voluntary evacuations for folks that live in unsafe structures. Times that we've had to have evacuations, such as wildfires, where a fire is encroaching a home, and we've had public safety folks go door to door to tell folks you need to leave now or your home's going to be consumed, which has been far and few between. There's never been an issue, but in my memory, we've never had a mandatory evacuation. Folks have to get out because we live in Lake County. It's the center of the state. We're on high ground. So our message to the folks to the residents is that if you live in an unsafe structure, then you need to plan appropriately.
Unless there's a hurricane of a biblical nature.
Correct.
Unless there's a hurricane of a biblical nature. Realistically, you're better off staying in Lake County than trying to evacuate to Georgia, aren't you?
Absolutely. That whole philosophy has changed from evacuating hundreds of thousands of miles to tens of miles. Get to a safe structure. Because as an inland county, it's not the flooding we have to worry about. It's the wind. It's making sure that you're protected from the wind.
When you think about evacuations here in Lake County, isn't one of the primary roles for Lake County more as an evacuation area for people? For example, if Hurricane Andrew were to threaten South Florida, wouldn't Lake County serve as a place for a lot of people to come to shelter?
There are existing plans for Lake County to be a host shelter. So what we have to do is look at, if that hurricane is coming, are we going to be impacted? If we are, then we have to provide impact sheltering for those who need it. But if we're not going to be impacted so much by the weather, but an impact of being a host county, then we have to be able to plan for it. And then if that's the case, then we're not opening schools for sheltering, because we need to keep schools open so kids are in schools and mom and dad can continue to go to work. We're going to really work with the American Red Cross to find churches and to find the appropriate places to get these folks where they can get in until they can find hotels, or if they can find alternate lodging until they can go back home.
And that's something we got to think about. And that's probably, to me, that has to be more of a concern for you, because quite frankly, if there were a major hurricane to go in Tampa or someplace like that, you could actually, this area could serve as a major support system for a metropolitan area, couldn't it?
It is, and in the planning in Central Florida is that Orange County will get them, that they've got a lot of capacity for hotel space if they're not being affected, that a lot of the folks would go there, but we know in Lake County that we would see a substantial uptick. There's a state evacuation plan done in 2010 that shows us that we would receive quite a few folks, and so that it is a concern because if a hurricane affects Florida, then all three ports that provide fuel are shutting down. Fuel will be the absolute number one commodity. So we know as we have folks coming in that they'll be looking for fuel. Local folks will be looking for fuel. So it's going to provide increased demand for services locally, and we have to be ready for.
The most important thing, and you tell me if I'm wrong, if in a case like that, you probably need the citizens to cooperate and stay off the roads and help wherever possible, and volunteer at your local churches and get soup kitchens going and stuff like that.
There may very well be a tremendous demand on depending on who shows up here, and that's one of the things that we really would like to. I think that's a very positive aspect of our community is the volunteerism and how we give back. And there may be a demand through local charities, through the Red Cross, Salvation Army, local churches. We have wonderful local churches that will see an uptick in services through their parishioners or through just folks coming here that have nothing but had to escape the weather. So we stay in contact with those folks to get their help and to get their feedback on what they can provide.
You know, Tommy, another thing that occurs when the say in South Florida when there's a hurricane warning, maybe it's not a hurricane warning up here, but the whole state falls into this system when there's a warning or a watch that now your insurance parameters change and your pricing parameters, and there's a lot of rules that go in effect against gouging and such. People have really got to know those rules, don't they? They
do, and that, I think what we talked about earlier, that's that discussion they should have every year with their insurance agent. It's that getting to be that time of year. Let's take a look at the policy about the home, the policy to fix the home, but the valuables inside, and figure out what are those rules of engagement. Once Florida is then within the cone of a hurricane or tropical cyclone, then everything kind of stops. Claims stop. The ability to, what are the rules for insurance? And I think that's a good update folks should get every year.
You're listening to Around the House, sponsored by Romac Lumber. Our special guest is Tommy Carpenter. He's the division manager for Lake County Emergency Services. And before or after the storm, do you need hurricane supplies? Contact Romac Lumber in Leesburg, Mount Dora, the Villages, or Ocala, and they can help you with all your supplies. Plus, after the storm, if you need emergency services for windows, doors, garage doors, call Romac Lumber. They have the best window and door departments in Central Florida, and they can help you get patched up right away. Let's take, for example, after a storm hits, say we have a hurricane strike, what should people be prepared to do at that point, Tommy?
First and foremost, make sure that they're safe, that everything that is involved in the home or wherever they are, that they're okay and that they've taken care of themselves and the folks that are around them. But I think to be prepared for an environment they haven't probably seen in quite a while, power outages, lots of trees down, the inability to get places where they would want to go, the potential for damage to not only their home but homes around them. It can be a very upsetting, emotionally traumatic time for them. And also just understand that it's going to take time. And we talked earlier about Sandy, and one of the things about Sandy, if a storm like Sandy affected Florida, which was hundreds of miles across, it means each county, each area is taking care of themselves.
Right.
So the cavalry may not be coming as quick as they think, and folks may need to realize that they're going to be on their own for a little bit until services can start rolling in.
Well, you know, one thing, and you can speak to this also, Tommy, after every hurricane I've been through, the one thing that's most tragic is the accidents and deaths that occur after the storm, because you have people, accountings and bankers and office people, who are doing things they don't know what they're doing, like using chainsaws, axes, they're around electrical wires, or driving in debris and stuff. And a lot of people have been killed and hurt. You know, for example, a lot of people don't know how to handle generators and how to vent them out. Those are big issues, aren't they?
They absolutely are. They're things that that residents should address ahead of time. They should get proper training and to operate those items ahead of time. Chainsaws, numerous accidents. When my former career, I was a paramedic with the ambulance service, and we went to Pensacola after Ivan. Chainsaws, power lines, and believe it or not, snakes.
Absolutely.
Because critters have been just as upset as everybody else, and so when they go out and there's debris everywhere, they're not going to be the most friendly. And in Lake County, we have lots of reptiles, snakes, alligators. So residents need to be careful of those too.
And the other thing is you have to be prepared with your medicines. A lot of people think that the drugstores will open back up, and that may not be the case.
It's not. And I want to just read you something just quickly. House Bill 7121 that was passed into law June 1st, 2006, addresses just that issue in terms of prescription medications. So what happens is made it easier for individuals who take medications to receive a 30-day refill, whether they need it or not, prior to an imminent hurricane threat. So here are the kind of the rules of engagement for this. Mm-hmm. You must live in a county you are seeking the prescription medication refill from, and that the county that you live in has been issued to be under a hurricane warning by the National Weather Service, or has been declared to be under a state of emergency in an executive order issued by the governor, or your county emergency operations center has activated the emergency operations center and its emergency management plan. So folks who take prescription medications, if there's an impending hurricane coming and one of those three apply, then they can go back to their pharmacist and get a 30-day refill whether they need it or not.
And that's amazing. And let's be clear about something. That's not just for hurricanes.
It's not. No, it didn't say.
Yeah. For example, if we had a tornado tomorrow and you were under a state of emergency here and you didn't know when say there was an impending storm or something man-made happen, you could have that extra 30 days to keep you going, couldn't you?
It could. I think the premise of this bill was because of the 2004 hurricane season, but if one of those parameters apply, then folks can go back and get that 30-day refill before they run out.
Another big thing these days are, once again, I'm going back to this cell phone thing. Mm-hmm. If something happens, you need to have an emergency contact plan, don't you? A rendezvous point. It sort of sounds nerdy. I know it does, but every family needs a rendezvous point. For example, if a man-made emergency or something cataclysmic happened, where are you going to all rendezvous, and where are you going to call, and who's going to spread the word that you're okay?
That's absolutely right. That's one of the main points of a disaster preparedness plan for a family is how do you communicate? 2004, Lake County received thousands of phone calls from folks outside of Lake County, within the United States and outside of the United States, because they were looking for loved ones. They didn't have a communications plan. They didn't know who to call. Now with cell phones being as prevalent as they are, it's a wonderful tool. And even Craig Fugate, the administrator of FEMA, has done a couple of really nice PSAs talking about texting. And as a father with a teenage daughter, I'd get so frustrated with her, but believe it or not, texting is probably one of the best backup forms of communication. And when everything else is not working, the technology in which SMS or text messages are designed to work on still work. So that's a great time now to work into your plan. Who's your outside area contact? Who's that person that's going to be the person that you called to arrange where you're going to go? Texting within a family, you can create groups where everyone can text one another, and that technology is reliable, and it's probably going to be one of the last ones to go if we have some type of infrastructure failure. So those things are very important to consider.
Let's discuss, how are you, the Lake County Emergency Management Team, going to communicate with people in the case of a big emergency?
Again, we're going to work through our public information officers, and we're going to use all those avenues in terms of Orlando media, newspaper, internet, email distribution group. We're going to work with our amateur radio operators we have a phenomenal network in Lake County that we can communicate. If we're not going to be able to communicate if it's not information we need to communicate to the public, but to our shelters or to hospitals, we have that infrastructure in place. So we're going to use every method of communication that we can get out through not only county, but all the municipal and agency PIOs also, to get the same consistent message out to our residents.
Let's talk about. We've got a few minutes left. Let's talk about other emergencies and some various things. Of course, we had the tornadoes a few years ago, and that was tragic. Tornadoes can happen anytime, can't they?
They sure can. There have been since June 1st. I mentioned earlier, it was like a light switch. Someone flipped a light switch. We've had severe thunderstorm warnings almost every afternoon that bring on tremendous straight line winds that also have the potential to develop tornadoes. So it's a very real possibility and potential in Lake County.
And then you have industrial accidents and industrial spills. And while Lake County is not a huge industrial area, you had a pretty bad industrial accident a few years ago, didn't you?
Blue Rhino, I remember it was July 29th, 2013, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 54,000 20-pound cylinders went off. And it was nighttime, and it was, thank goodness no one was seriously hurt, but it was a phenomenal bright light in the sky, but that really had the potential to affect a lot more folks because there were 30,000-pound cylinders that were there that the fire service came in and did a wonderful job of protecting. But I think folks have driven past there for years and wondered what would ever happen if something did happen there, and it did. And so now that kind of goes back to my all-hazard preparedness for those folks that lived within a mile or two of that. They had to almost thought they were going to have to get up in the middle of the night and leave, and some did. But that to me is the ultimate in preparedness, to be able, within 5 minutes after you wake up, you know something's wrong and you have to leave. Do you have everything ready to go to do that?
Well, people forget that you're on. We have probably the busiest highways in America running right adjacent to Lake County, and there's chemicals and things being brought down these highways and on the train tracks all the time. Those could offer serious spills and implications, couldn't they?
They could. And I have to commend our fire service and our hazards materials folks who train and plan diligently for just those types of scenarios. The software that's available, we work with the weather service for plume modeling so that we can inform residents and give them the very best information in terms of protection. If it's a chemical where it's safe just to close your windows and turn off your air, if it's safe to shelter in place, or if it's that bad that they've got to get up and move out. So our public safety community has done a really wonderful job in terms of their knowledge, their planning, and operational execution of those plans.
Tommy, I guess unfortunately we've got to talk about one other area of disaster preparedness. Is they call it man-made events or terrorist attacks. I'm afraid that has to be part of your scenario now, doesn't it?
It is. Lake County brings some phenomenal events to our area. Leesburg Bike Fest, Mount Dora, their craft fair, their arts festival. And our office works with the sheriff's office, the public safety sector, with the municipalities, City of Leesburg, their public safety folks, Claremont, Mount Dora. An example is after the Boston Marathon bombing in April of 2013, I believe. We were 2 weeks away from Bike Fest, but we do annual planning. Our office works with Leesburg and their city and public safety folks with the sheriff's office, and we sat down and we took the plan. We looked at it. We looked at it locally. We'd already made those plans and those contingencies, and then we shared our plan with state and federal law enforcement because they're involved in that event. And we had done our due diligence. We had planned for just something just like that, so we were able to move everything forward as planned, and it worked well.
Tommy, unfortunately, though, all the planning in the world and all the law enforcement personnel, you can't win this without the help of the public.
Absolutely, and I think when you watch national news and you see the things that are going around the country, there's a program or a philosophy: if you see something, say something. And so many times there have been things that have been discovered or prevented because the public has seen something that didn't look right or looked out of place, or someone that didn't look like they meant well, and that information was properly reported so that issue was stopped before it happened.
If someone sees something they are very suspicious of, say they're driving down the road and they see a group of men going behind a building and it looks very suspicious, or they see someone walking outside of a church during Sunday and it looks very suspicious, who should they call?
They should report that, and they can
just call 911.
Call 911, and we've talked to several law enforcement folks, and that's how That's how some pretty major significant things have been stopped, is because somebody saw something, reported it, an officer was sent out, it was discovered and stopped.
You know, the Chattanooga shooting is you have people who have mental issues everywhere. And I guess the burden's really got to be placed upon the people to stop some of this stuff, doesn't it?
It is. And I have to be careful here because I don't want to step outside my realm, but from everything we've seen and heard, it kind of goes back to that see something, say something. And a lot of times family members are involved. And if family members see something that's not right, or that something is just peculiar, out of place, then they need to address that ahead of time, especially with mental health issues. Somebody's typically aware of what's going on.
What non-hurricane threat concerns you the most?
I would have to say it goes back to all hazards preparedness. It's that sinkhole that opens up in the middle of the night, and it can happen in Florida. When there's drought, we have sinkholes, and when it rains too much, we have sinkholes. It's that something horrible just happened, and that family is in the home sleeping, and they have to get up and leave. That's a very real possibility. We've seen it happen, and how well are they prepared to get up and go?
They need to have their emergency preparedness kits ready to pick up at any time, don't they?
Absolutely. What are the things they need to get up and go?
Once again, checklist of things. Make sure if you're going to use a generator to not put them inside because of carbon monoxide. Chainsaws, make sure you know how to use them before you pick one up. If you're uncomfortable with one, don't pick it up. Watch for power lines. Drinking water, do not drink water if it's contaminated. A lot of people die from that. Spoiled products, don't eat if you think it's spoiled. Temporary wiring, be real careful around all wiring. Another problem people have is gas storage. They'll buy 5 gallons worth of gas, put it inside next to a water heater or something, create a problem. And then there's you've got to have your personal needs, both your personal hygiene needs and your medicines, don't you? That's a quick checklist, but those are some of your basic items, isn't it?
Absolutely, and some of the things that folks think about last.
Tommy, real quick, give our listeners information on how to contact you, and real quick, the list of shelters that will be available in case of any emergency.
Okay, I'll hit the shelters first. All of our 9 public shelters are public elementary schools. Astatool Elementary, Leesburg Elementary, Lost Lake Elementary in Claremont, Mascot Charter Elementary, Round Lake Charter Elementary outside Mount Dora, Spring Creek Charter in Paisley, Treadway Elementary in Leesburg, Umatilla Elementary, Villages Elementary. Our office number is 352-343-9420. You can catch us on Facebook at Lake County FL Emergency Management or Twitter at Lake Emergency.
Well, Tommy Carpenter, thank you for being our guest today. We've learned a lot, and I hope everyone in Lake County is safe. But if you have a question, call Tommy. Be sure to catch Around the House to call him every Wednesdays in the South Lake Press and Saturdays in the Daily Commercial, and every Monday from noon until 1 on WLBE. Catch Around the House. Until next week, we will see you around the house.